Mood reading derailed my October, but I'm really glad it did because I found this absolute gem. Hello everyone, welcome back to A Fictional Escapist. My name is Kris and today's video is my book of the month for October, which is The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. This was an unexpected delight that I picked up in the month of October because it happened to be available on my library app. This is a gothic horror focusing on much more than just a creepy dwelling. Now, I went into The Haunting of Hill House with little to no expectations. I knew it was a haunted house tale, but I also knew that my relationship with haunted houses can be described as turbulent at best. However, I have had a lot of luck with classics this year, just the way that the prose is so lyrical and beautiful, the way that the drama is front and center between our characters, and also the build-up of atmosphere, and I'm happy to say that The Haunting of Hill House had all of that in abundance. Now, very early on into this book, we are introduced to a cast of characters who are already set up to have an interesting dynamic as we move into Hill House itself. So we're introduced to Eleanor, who is my favourite character by far, and I'll get more into her as the review goes on, Theodora, Luke, and Dr. Montague. And their dynamics together are also different. The people themselves, are different to one another. So the dynamic together was already promising to be quite interesting from the get-go. We are told that Dr. Montague is a scholar of the occult. He picks Hill House as a destination to see whether he can catch or prove any supernatural or psychic elements that are happening within that dwelling. He places an ad in the local newspaper to try and reach out to a select few people to join him of his endeavours over the 3 months of summer. Amongst those who take the doctor up on his offer is Luke, who is a family member set to inherit the estate, and he comes across as sort of this lark-like character who doesn't really believe the house is under any sort of psychic influence or phenomenon, but he's just happy to be there, and he needs to be there because the whole experiment couldn't be done without a member of the estate being present. We then have Theodora, who comes across as a spoiled young woman who is looking to flee the burdens of her own home life for a few months while they tide over, and then she can go back to it, but again doesn't really believe in what's going on here. Then we get to Eleanor, who is introduced as this anxiety-riddled, meek, friendless character who has just looked after her mother until she passed away for the last decade. She's a little bit older for the time that we're in, almost spinster age at the age of 31. I say that as a 34-year-old. And she doesn't really know what she wants with her life, but she knows that what she's doing isn't satisfying her in any way. So she also responds to this ad and say, hey, I'm going to go and do something else for 3 months. And goodbye to the sister and her brother-in-law, regardless of what they think. She desperately wants to shed the anxiety that she feels about everything and make something of herself. But to do that, she needs to get out from under the foot of her family members. These character dynamics play off one another so well, but like I said, Eleanor really stole the show for me. Now, there was quite a lot I liked about this book. The atmosphere of the house and how Jackson makes fun of supernatural elements through the eyes of her characters, while simultaneously also having these unexplainable events happen in the background, which makes our characters and us as the reader go, oh, could that be something happening there? The tension of these scenes, coupled with the playfulness of the banter between the characters, really helped to build the atmosphere of the world that we're in. I also feel like there was an interesting and effective contrast between the main characters and the side characters of the story. So our main characters don't tend to believe that anything is untoward. They kind of think that people like the caretaker and the people of the town are being ridiculous, and that they haven't really seen anything going on in the house, so why is everyone so afraid of it? That being said, when we go through the town prior to Eleanor going to the house, it is clear that there is so much distrust towards this property, the estate, and the caretakers that they're like, you need to get out because something weird's going on there. We don't want to be any part of it. No one moves to this town willingly and no one gets out. And it was very much that vibe that we had going in. And then we had the caretakers themselves. So there is a woman, and her name, I've forgotten the name, I think it's Mrs. Dudley, don't quote me on that, who is so strict and set in her ways, and she's like, I leave before sunset because you're on your own. As soon as it gets dark in here, I don't want anything to do with this house. And she repeats herself, and that repetition is creepy in itself, which is really interesting because everyone else is thinking that she's a little bit ridiculous, but then things start happening. These sets of characters being at odds with one another was really interesting because it felt tension heavy throughout any scene that they were both in. It gave me the sense that there was always something like on the precipice of happening in this house, and I needed to be on my guard while I was reading, which is a really cool thing to have happen while you're reading a spooky story. You know, the horror elements in there, it's not modern horror by any means, but the atmosphere was absolutely there. Now, Eleanor, I've mentioned, is someone who I was absolutely fascinated with as a character. She has this constant anxiety-riddled inner monologue that deep dives into her own psyche, playing up the anxiety of her presence within the group. She would often ramble to herself with both playful and sinister thoughts, often in the same passage without a breath between them. She would berate herself for her feelings, only to then shift and be confident in those feelings in the next second. She would grow bolder in her mind, and then her actions would be meeker, again adding to this tension that just ran throughout the group and her dynamic within that group itself. You could feel her being effective by these suggestive events and digging herself further and further into her own mind with every turn of the page. Now, once again, with this classic, I was just stunned by the prose. It was dramatic, it was embellished, it just glided off the page beautifully and created a poetic and musical flow for me as the reader. Now, I did this one on audio as well, and often I find that classics with this lyrical prose can just flow, and it just has this beautiful, almost lyricism to it, which just gives this story an element of beauty that I think may be lost if I had read it physically. Each line led into the next with this artful flow, and I was absolutely delighted by what I was listening to at the time. Now, the only thing that I would probably warn may not be the right word, but caution, if you love the adaptation and you have not picked up this book yet, is just go into it knowing that it's its own entity. It is not directly the same thing from the adaptation to the book. From what I understand of the reviews of the adaptation, it has taken liberties of the lore of Haunting of Hill House. So there is a few characters which I mention very briefly of the history in Hill House and the lineage that it has passed down to. And I believe, don't quote me on this, but I believe it is those characters that we really follow in The Haunting of Hill House. So it is an adaptation, it's taken the creative liberties, it is by no means the same thing. I personally loved this book. I really enjoyed the prose, I enjoyed the dynamics between the characters. I even didn't mind those haunted house elements, which I generally don't like in other things. I cannot wait to dive into more classic horror sometime soon. I think it's just beautiful the way that it's written, and it also gives me a sense of heebie-jeebies. So, there's that. Have you read The Haunting of Hill House? Are you going to read The Haunting of Hill House? Let me know in the comments down below. I'm very interested to what you have to say. If you like this content, give one of those. If you want to see more of it, click subscribe at your will, and I will catch you in the next video. Ciao.